in the telecommunications field. And I know that particular phrase is going to be fleshed out by Mr. Keith Galitz in a moment, probably as well. What I should say is there's been discussions on both this ordinance and the other ordinance that TW Telecom is also here to do, which also has strikingly similar language. We've had discussions about the fact that you guys have given me marching orders to bring to you a privilege tax. And so everybody has had those discussions, and they are aware. In fact, Mr. Solos knows that at least in 3 places in this particular franchise, it references to the potentiality of things imposed, such as a privilege tax, either in place now or hereafter, will apply to the franchisees coming in under these contracts. So that's the lay of the land. I didn't know if Mr. Solis wanted to say anything in regards to this particular one.
I'm just here as a resource if you have questions.
Okay.
Okay.
And I don't know if you have any further questions for me on this.
Well, I would just add that we are planning on having a work session here at the beginning of June to discuss the next phase of our agreements and then going from there. Is that correct?
Well, the next phase of our agreement.
Sorry, I meant that just in terms of the changing the dialogue around the franchise piece.
Well, we may be talking about the privilege tax. Is that?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
if I
Okay,
could
sure.
add, this includes that conversation that we've been having
Okay.
of the privilege tax at 7% of revenues. And it is in here, it's in both of them tonight. And one of the items I was a little bit concerned with, because of some of the language in here, where it talks about anchors, wires, cables, along, anyway, it implied that we still permit aerial construction of telecom, and we don't. And Joe pointed out to me this evening when I questioned him that under Municipal Code Chapter 12.36, it's in there that we do not permit aerial construction. So I'm good with what he's drawn up.
Well, I will say that it's, in the last couple of years, this has gained a lot of steam through our council. It's been great having Councilor Ayers with his background to be able to expand on and help weed through the weeds on these pieces. So, do we want to just treat these separately together?
Well,
terms of, I
we should
understand
probably
Mr.
treat them separately, because I think
Okay.
Mr. Nicholson is here and was going to say a few things. Were you in regards to it, or?
Well, same as Mr. Solis. If there's questions that the mayor or the council has, we'll be glad to answer those.
And I should say, as just a parenthetic to what Councilor Ayers said, is this does incorporate our current code, which is 1236, in its entirety. It is made pursuant to it, and it incorporates it. So everything you see here is in addition to the long-standing telecommunications ordinance that we have in place.
So will us putting this into place this evening change any of that that we may do here in the coming months?
Well, there will be a change to the manner and the I guess, type of services that can be taxed.
Okay.
And so that's going to be the change when the privilege tax come in. I've been open with both applicants tonight that we're going to closely model it after the model ordinance, privilege tax ordinance that was put together by Barry Elsner Law Firm, but through the League of Oregon Cities. And so I've even gone as far as to point out this is very similar to what we're going to be attempting to do. And they're still here because both parties seem to have a sense of urgency that they have. The county wants to get to its fairgrounds and to a few of its prospective folks. And I assume through just slight communications with Mr. Nicholson is that Time Warner also has some folks that would like to get going on their services more sooner than later.
So, Mr. Galitz, I understand you have comments that you'd like to.
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Keith Galitz. I'm president of Canby Telecom. I'd like to start off by first reading from an email I sent to Greg Ellis back on April 12th. For the record, on behalf of Canby Telecom and its patrons, I want to express our deep concern about the current state of the city franchise agreements. Specifically, I want to address three areas. First, inequities compared to what Canby Telecom is obligated and does pay. Second, the inadequacies of the city's current franchise agreements. Third, the city's need for revenue and support for the use of the city's streets and easements. Seems like revenue comes up quite a bit tonight. As you know, the Wave franchise carved out a very narrow definition of what they would pay franchise fees upon because of their use of VoIP technology, voice over internet protocol. I suspect their payments have been less than a few $1,000s, if not a few $100s, compared to Canby Telecom's franchise payments for voice services. LS Networks received a new franchise, but if they only deliver broadband service, I question whether the city will ever receive any payments. Clackamas County has publicly stated that they do not intend to offer retail services, only broadband wholesale service, but Clackamas County now wants a telephone franchise. You're aware that Clackamas County buried Conduit almost a year ago in the right-of-way without any franchise in violation of the city ordinance. Recently, TW Telecom requested to move forward with a franchise. The industry recognizes that all of these companies intend to primarily, if not exclusively, offer fiber-based Ethernet and other broadband services. If Clackamas County and TW Telecom are required to pay franchise fees based upon voice service only, the city will receive little or no fees for their use of access to Canby city customers using the city's streets and right-of-ways. It's imperative that the city of Canby must begin to immediately charge a use fee for access to the city streets and right-of-ways. You're probably aware that the City of Oregon City recognized this problem and negotiated a set monthly fee of $12,000 and a one-time payment of $1,000 for Clackamas County's prior unauthorized placement of their facilities within the City of Oregon City. Our understanding is that this was based on the use of streets rather than the estimated voice revenues. We believe that Canby must do the same thing with Clackamas County, a one-time fee for the continuing violation of the city franchise requirement and a monthly fee. And for all other providers, at least a monthly minimum fee should be assessed. As staff and council will recall, Canby Telecom disclosed to the City Council at a meeting over a year ago that it also has a soft switch and can provide voice over internet protocol services at any time. Currently, Canby Telecom is using traditional TDM technology for all our customers on the soft switch. We've elected not to exclusively go to VoIP because of our historical relationship with the city and the citizens of this community. Nevertheless, we cannot economically survive by charging and paying fees that are not paid by other carriers. In summary, Canby Telecom respectfully requests the staff and the City Council immediately address these three concerns. Also, it is respectfully suggested that approval of any new franchises be held in abeyance until such time as the city ordinance are reviewed and appropriately addressed. So this was the essence of my email. I'd like to point out a couple of other things. First of all, as I've said, Clackamas County placed that conduit over a year ago. Yet they never came forward after they were caught. They apologized for it and said they didn't think they needed a franchise. Then when they were told they needed a franchise, they did nothing to move forward. Now they come here tonight saying there's an urgency. A year later, they think there's an urgency. I believe the council can take the time and change the ordinance and move forward with an appropriate ordinance and appropriate fees and not do it on an urgent basis as urged by Clackamas County. Also, as I've mentioned, Wave carved out a very narrow exemption on what they would pay. And looking at the city records, in the fourth quarter of last year, Wave paid $355.20. They had about $7,000 in voice revenues, but they're claiming that only 20% of those revenues are subject to the city telephone franchise fee. We, on the other hand, paid over $14,900 in the fourth quarter to the city based upon our voice services. Now, if we go to VoIP and we start calculating 20% of our revenues, the fees paid to this city will go down by over 2/3. Now, that's not what we want to do. We're part of this community, but we cannot operate on an uneven playing field. And that's all we're asking for. We believe that competition is good when it's fair and even and equal. Roger?
Roger Rife, 273 North Grant Street, on behalf of Canby Telephone. I just have 3 short points. Number 1, we totally agree with the city of Canby that they have the right to charge reasonable fees for the access to their streets. It should be there. Canby Telephone agrees. Number 2, that is, months ago I came to this group and talked about a level playing field, and on behalf of the Board of Directors of Canby Telephone, we think you're trying to do it, and we thank you. The third point is, I really think we're getting the cart before the horse a little bit here tonight. And here's what I think, is that when I was here a few months ago, I asked, and Keith brought it up too, to review and address the ordinances. My concern is that we should have the ordinance in place before we put these franchises in. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as a lawyer, I had a situation here a few months ago, and I thought this is pretty applicable. I had a lady come in and says, you know, I got this check from this guy, and I gave him my deed to my house, and the check bounced. Oh, Houston, we have a problem. So here's what I think. You know, it's been over a year. Let's get our ducks in a row and get the franchise out there so we know what we are. Now, my concerns is this is, do I think anything will go wrong? Probably not. But right now, the city has some leverage. Don't lose your leverage. Keep it going. You know, come up with your fee schedules, and we're going to support it. The concerns I have are 2. Technology is changing. I've been in the telecommunications field for a number of years, and I have a really, really hard time keeping up. It's difficult for me. Second of all, court cases come down about every day, and it changes this thing, and I get surprised. Sometimes I predict them, sometimes I don't. And I feel like, oh. So will it work out? You put it in the ordinance? Yes, I think so. I believe people are honest. But I can tell you, East Coast lawyers are great at writing letters in this telecommunications file and say, guess what happened in little Middletown, any state, United States. And they say, you can't do this to us, and it does it. So what I'm suggesting is, get your fee schedule in. If you put the people in without your fee schedules intact of what you're going to do, then they're going to come out there and says, oh, I have a franchise. You can't do this to me. So get it in here. We're not asking. We think it's there. We're going to support this when we see the ordinance and make sure that it's there. And I think this is really what the city wants. It's in the best interest. This is only a 3 or 4 week delay. I hear it's that. Get them on there, review them, make sure it's what you want, pass them at the same time. But just don't get caught in a little trap. I just think that's the best interest of the city. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Have either of you read these agreements?
I have not.
Okay, we're going to a privilege fee arrangement. And-
Yes, question. I had an extensive conversation with Joe. Joe was really good about talking about it, but I haven't read it.
Okay. Basically, what it is any and all revenue of any kind, nature, or form without deduction for expense earned within the city of Canby, and so on, pays 7% of revenues.
The City of Oregon City's franchise with Clackamas County said $1,000 for the last violation.
I understand what they're saying.
And a
but
minimum of $12,000.
What we were trying to do was develop the fee structure, and also Joe has words in here, if we ever change it, it changes to everybody that has the agreement. But what we were trying to do was set up the same schedule and based on revenue for all providers in the city. In fact, we're carrying the same, at least the intent is to carry this same ordinance or concept to all franchises in the city, whether it be electric, gas, what's the next thing to come along. But everyone, including Canby Telecom and Wave Broadband and anybody else that may come in, have the same agreement and the same fee, privilege fee structure.
And they've acknowledged they're willing to pay it on dark fiber, broadband,
It's revenue. It's based on revenue. Any and all revenue of any kind, nature, or form.
And is the city proposing any fees or fines for the violation that's been ongoing for a year for Clackamas County?
No, it's not part of the negotiation here, but that particular breach, if you will, had to do with when the street was being repaved over there, and it was, even though it's seemingly a violation in bad faith of our streets, it's so close to county property, and it had to do with, from a certain point of view, it wasn't so secretive because the person in Works was talking with Craig Ellis about it, that we didn't feel like punishing somebody was as important as just working something out that was equal with everybody. I mean, that's my answer.
They've had access to your streets for over a year.
Well,
and over a year, they denied they needed a franchise. I was in meetings where they said no franchise was required.
well, I'm not sure, are you talking about Oregon City or
No,
here?
I'm talking about here when we were in a work session
Oh, okay.
7 months ago.
Okay, because my recollection of that meeting, if I was in attendance, was that they were willing to have a franchise, they just needed to, basically, we needed to work it out. But I mean, we might have a different recollection of what the facts are.
That is where they started, but that wasn't acceptable to the council or to us, and so we have been working on a franchise for, trying to get one for quite some time, and finally got to this. It has been taking a long time.
Okay, so where I'm hearing then is that was, we
Well,
cracked
that's
open
what-
we cracked open the pavement and
No,
so.
that was the
For-
street in front of the fairgrounds.
Right.
And actually, you can ask Mr. Solos, but he actually worked with, unbeknownst to me anyway, he worked with Jeff Kersey to put that in. Didn't know it at the time. And Mr. Solos has made an argument that
Jeff Kersey was the contractor.
Jeff Kersey was a contractor to put that in. And Mr. Solis made the argument, and he's here to deny or agree, made the argument that that was county property. And I said, no, that's not county property, that's city. But right now, it's not being used, it's in our street. I don't see right now what the benefit would be to go back and try to find anybody or tell them to take it out at this point.
That's all we're asking.
I know. Well, you said it's been fined or reprimanded, and the answer is no. He has not.
And sorry if I misspoke, I thought he worked with our Works guy, but it was the contractor there.
Well, I understand he worked with Mr. Kersey to put that in.
And then did we get the information through our Works department?
And that could be. He
Oh,
may have-
okay.
They may have referred them to Mr. Kersey and said, that's,
Okay.
but our works people work with the streets and the contractors, not necessarily with franchises.
Okay.
Question? I did not bring my copy of the franchise, but I believe that the franchise fees in the agreement for us are based upon total revenues. So what Mr. Gallitz was talking about earlier with being just on voice services or exchange service revenues, while that applies to him, it doesn't apply to the franchise we have. So any services that we would be providing, the franchise fees are based upon the total revenue, which is the same thing Mr. Ayers was talking about with the privilege tax. So in that sense, they really comport one to the other, from the franchise fees to the privilege tax. And it's on total revenues, which are far greater than what just exchange services that Canby Telephone is currently paying franchise fees on.
Well, and that's correct, and that's why we started some time ago trying to get to this model, because the FCC rules, state PUC rules, and so on are, you know, they're on the old model of franchises we've had for eons. There were games you could play when VoIP came in, and, you know, and on the telephone side, certain of his revenues are taxed and certain of his revenues are not taxed. Like voicemail wasn't on the tax. This model that we're moving to is total revenue. You know, call it what you want. It's elephants and oranges, but if it's $1, we get 7 cents.
And that's what's currently in the franchise
Right.
that's before you tonight,
Right.
And,
as franchise fee.
and my understanding, Mr. Galitz, is that you're saying hold off until
Till you have
everything's
that
locked
ordinance
into
in place and have it placed. And I'd also ask, because again, I've not read it, Rich, so I have Mr. Ayers, Councilman Ayers. I've not, so what about in the case of Clackamas County, who is wholesaling the services, and they're going to be charging, say, a TW Telecom or somebody else? Are they, is it excluding, do they have an exclusion where they would then claim whether or not citizens of the city of Canby, and therefore,
Let me read it again. Any and all revenue of any kind, nature, or form without deduction for expense earned in the city of Canby and is further defined in Section 11. All such revenue remains subject to applicable FCC rules and regs, so if there's overriding rules, then we have to abide by that. But it's very clear, all revenue earned in the city.
So from that standpoint, the 7% in the franchise fee currently on total revenue mirrors exactly what you plan to change to with the privilege tax, except that the privilege tax will be 7% of their total revenues, which is far greater than just the exchange revenues now. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
But more importantly, from our discussions, it's extremely different from Way Broadband of how they've defined their exemptions to the tax.
So that'll bring WAVE to
When, yeah, and I don't know, you know, if we have to do it at renewal time, or that's for Joe to figure out, but that's where we're going, and it's where we're going for the gas company, it's where we're going for the, I mean, we're there pretty close with gas and electric and the others, but we'll be on the same model, so legal counsel, the vendors, and the accounting department, it's the same rule for everybody, so that we can manage it much better.
Mr.
And you're welcome to one of these if you want to read it.
Were you asking, so if Clackamas County is playing a wholesale role, is it, are we gaining, and they link up to somebody else?
are they going to game it the way Wave did with VoIP services, is
So are
my
we-
concern.
So we're taking the privilege tax on Clackamas counties, which may be considerably less than what they're hooking, or what's hooking up to their
No,
system.
if it's revenue,
If
it's
it's revenue.
revenue.
The exception to this will be for those carriers, of which we have many, that route through town, the one that's, what's it?
360 is one.
360
They're not called that
and,
anymore.
yeah, I know, they, yeah, it's all
Back in
those.
your day.
Back in those days, yeah. But all of those companies that came under the Willamette River and come through town, up Birch, down Knightsbridge, et cetera, generate no revenue in this community. But they're in our roads. So we're looking and going and have bill them on a per-foot basis, similar to Oregon City's doing for the county, but on a per-foot basis. So even those that are coming through the community, if they're in our streets, they're going to pay us something for that. Because we have to go out and do a locate out there every other day when, you know, just find all our fiber going up Birch and
Well, again, Clackamas County is somewhat unique. Time Warner's most likely not going to build unless they have revenue coming in or have a customer committed. Clackamas County, on the other hand, is building because they've got a grant. So they're going to be in your streets without any payment until they get revenue. And so it does trouble us that there is no fee being paid for the entry into the streets. And they could plow miles of fiber into this community and never gain a dime, and therefore never pay a dime. And we don't believe that's fair. We believe you need to set a minimum fee in the case of Clackamas County, which is what, again, the city of Oregon City understood that. They have no guaranteed customer. They have no guaranteed revenue. They're not a real business. And they've gotten a grant, hundreds of millions or millions of dollars. I don't remember the exact amount, so I shouldn't say anything, but it's millions of dollars. And just as they could spend the money to go into the fairgrounds, they will go out to other locations, and they may never pay you a dime. And that's our concern. And we have a huge investment in the ground in fiber in this community, for which we've paid dearly. So we don't believe, again, I have not read it, so I will confess my ignorance. But if it's based upon revenue, and they have no revenue, they've gotten access and are competing with us to get that revenue without the payment of any fees to get into your right-of-ways. And that's the reason we think you've got to set a minimum.
Well, I don't know, that's a different can of worms, if you will. I mean, it's just like if someone is here and they abandon their facilities, and the facilities are still here, we're not going to earn anything off of those revenues, and assuming.
But you don't give them a building permit without collecting fees.
But no, what I'm saying is if you chose to exit the business, the plant, the facilities are still there, but now there's no revenue left. So it's a conundrum of what do you do in that example, unless we went to a minimum per foot annual fee or something, I don't know.
But that, again, I think the city of Oregon City got it right. They said X% or a minimum of $12,000 a year.
Well, let me ask a question of Joe of our council. We were talking about this briefly just before the meeting started. And Joe, you pointed out in the agreement here something to the effect of the fee is what it is today, but if there's ever a change in the fee, it's immediate and
There's a section in this particular one that is at the end of section 2, which says that they agree to comply with all applicable state laws, local laws, ordinances, rules, and regulations, including our current 12.36, and with the mention that it can be amended from time to time. Then in 5B, I believe, or no, 5D, except as otherwise provided by law, nothing that's franchised shall be construed to give the franchisee any credit or exemption from any non-discriminatory, generally applicable business tax or other tax now or hereafter levied upon the franchisee's taxable property or against any permit fees or inspection fees required as a condition of the construction of any improvements upon the franchisee's real property or imposed upon generally applicable ordinance or resolution. And then finally in section 11, I believe, if I'm remembering
under
correctly.
11.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's section 18. That nothing, it starts out saying it shall comply with all applicable federal, state, and local laws, ordinance, now, whether now in existence or hereinafter enacted, so.
So, assuming the county, in this example, could be somebody else, chooses to sign a franchise agreement, giving us the 7% fee, but they transit the community and never serve the community, like those 360 and whoever, whatever they are, MCI. They were MCI when it went in, but
There's an answer in 12.36.
so we could go to that and charge a per fee
They have to
in lieu
actually,
of revenue.
they have to actually take it out at their cost, under
Oh, that's
12.36.
if it's abandoned.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not if you can't come to an agreement on the fee. I mean, I think Mr. Ayer's question is, they put it in, they don't really have any customers here, We end up with customers on that side of the city limits and on this side of the city limits.
Okay, I see.
And you've never collected anything for them being in the streets because they have no customers in the city on either end.
Well, my
Kind of like the train
understanding,
that comes through town and doesn't stop in town, it's still a
That's
train
right.
in town.
and maybe Mr.
And there's
Solis,
a real likelihood that that could occur.
maybe Mr. Solis will want to speak to this. We, during the course of this, there was an analogy to whether or not we were more like the pass-through or whether we were a spoke kind of at the end. And they were characterizing us kind of as a spoke at the end of their network, and how they basically had a few people that definitely were already invested in being provided their service. And I believe it was at $1,000 a month. Is that according to your grant and how it's written, I think that's where it is. I don't know what your individual contracts are, but.
Maybe we should leave and let him
Yeah.
come up to the microphone.
Okay.
So others
Great.
can hear.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you for your point. Thanks, Roger.
I think the model is, one of the reasons I think he's here is because he has some folks that actually do want the service that they're providing, that are here in town, that will earn money off of. He can address that perhaps, but I think it's a modest amount. I think it's $1,000 per month per partner or whatever it is, but.
Right, so, is this on?
Doesn't matter.
It's for
It's
TV.
on for TV, it doesn't work in this room.
So David Solis, SOL-OOS for your record, Clackamas County Broadband Program Manager. We did receive a grant from the federal government to build fiber optic cables around the county, as I think I've been here a few times and discussed with you. And right now, that fiber plant, the original plan was to bring fiber from the more or less south side, come through Canby, go through the north side, pick up or connect what we call anchor sites, which is just primarily public agencies, schools, fire stations, maybe Canby utility sites, whatever, things like that. That's it. We're not going to be a retail service provider of services like Time Warner Telecom or Canbytel or Wave provides to the general public. That's not what this is about. So we're not a competitor in that sense. And since then, the budget picture has changed, and I'm sure you guys know about that. And we do not have the money as our contractor, and we've discovered coming here, this is an undergrounding district entirely, so that's fine, but it changed our budget. So at this point, we've got a backbone fiber sitting at Township and Malino, waiting to come to two customers and two customers only, and that is to Baker Prairie, just barely over the edge of city limits, which is the school's data center. And they have asked for that. And the other one would be to go up to the Providence Hospital Clinic. And so at this point, any footprint we would have in your streets and rights-of-way would be to directly go to providing dark fiber to those customers, and none of this, we don't have any provision for a pass-through or whatever you're talking about in that sense. We would like to get to our fairgrounds, to take fiber to our own fairgrounds. We have a health clinic in the high school. We would like to get there eventually, but it's, cost dependent. If we pick up a couple of schools or a fire station or a library along the way, that's about as far as we go. So in terms of what you were saying, Counselor, we are planning to pay the 7% on all revenue. I don't know what these legal distinctions are between wholesale revenue and non-wholesale or whatever these gentlemen were talking about. It's very simple for us. Here's the revenue, 7%, or exactly as it calls out in here, and that's what the county plans to pay, which I think meets your need for a generally applicable agreement of whatever you call it, franchise fee, privilege tax, utility fee, have it be a flat fee on the whole base of revenue and pay that. So we are, I think, where you want us to be. LS Networks before us has virtually the identical agreement, and they're, I think, where you want them to be from what I've heard. In terms of waiting, waiting essentially kills this project for us because this grant is slated to be over on June 30th. And so to wait, we won't be here. That is essentially an effective denial because we won't have any money. We don't get to carry over any money. It's spend it or lose it. And it takes a long time to mobilize the workers to come in to build from that point at Township and Malino under the trestle, and everything's underground, and to the high school, or to the Baker Prairie School, as well as up and around Malino and Southeast First, and then underground to the hospital and we've still got to pull permits from your permit folks, and I don't know how long that takes. So, since you've already granted virtually the identical agreement to LS Networks, I'm puzzled what any kind of delay gets you, especially since we've agreed at 3 places in this agreement that any future changes to your code, we will abide by. Does that answer your questions?
That's mine.
Okay.
Well, one of the things you touched on is, you know, this, where we've been trying to get to is a revenue, it's defined as revenue, and it's not technology specific. That's what's tripped us up in the past, is when our first franchises were written for the incumbent telephone and cable carriers, they were written 40 years ago, 30 years ago, or more. And they were technology dependent. You know, you taxed one thing, but not another. Well, there wasn't the other, you know, and now there's all kinds of other. And so that's why we were determined to go to just a revenue model as opposed to a technology model. So that's what I think we've accomplished.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Comments, questions at all on where we're at with either of these ordinances?
Well, I confess, Mr. Mayor, I have been troubled by the cart before the horse feeling that we should have. I'm not a lawyer, you know, and so obviously challenges by East Coast lawyers to contracts that change after they've been signed bother me. They smell like an opportunity. On the other hand, you can argue that the franchise agreement says, yeah, you can go ahead and make one-side changes and we'll comply with them. But I have been excuse me, bothered that we don't have the ordinance in place before we award the franchises. And as Mr. Galitz has made the argument over the months, I have found the argument for a minimum fee, that is, say you'll pay the greater of the percentage of revenue or the minimum fee, to be a pretty compelling argument to catch things like pass-through. And we don't seem to have that language today. Those are my thoughts, Mr. Mayor.
And my thoughts echo those. I was wondering how we were going to address the fact that they have already put their lines in and such. I think the minimum.
Have you put the
The
lines in, or
minimum
is
wage.
it just the conduit under
The
the?
conduit.
No, we have not.
The conduit is what I meant.
There was one conduit of about 1,000 feet that went in front of the fairgrounds, and it was, in our perspective, an honest mistake. You might remember at that time, there's also a land transfer of the county because it had the parking lot to the city for the street, and we met with more than just your contractor. We met with your public utility folks at a couple of meetings, pre-meetings with them, and the whole construction pre-meetings with everybody present, including the city utility folks and the Canby utility folks. Went to the site visit the same. We thought that we were putting the conduit on what was at that time county parking lot that was going to be transferred, and under whatever arrangement we had for us to be in the right-of-way.
Mr. Solis did make that argument to me.
So I don't mean it to be an argument, just an explanation. The
Yeah,
conduit is sitting there, and as Greg mentioned, it's just sitting there. There's nothing in it. And like I said, we're waiting at the edge of town to see what happens here tonight about whether we proceed or not. And we hope you allow us to.
I guess my concern just does lie in if we decide to, in the ordinance, put a minimum in there, what kind of argument we might get from what we're calling the East Coast lawyers to make it not apply to these contracts.
Based on what Joe and I talked about this evening, he touched on here a moment. I'm not a lawyer either, at least a legal one. But the farm boys have a term for the kind of lawyer I am. It appears to me that the language Joe has put in here, basically that the fees that may be amended in the future can be implemented when we change the fee. And that was language we've never had before.
So we could
So
make
if-
a minimum.
If they sign the agreements tonight and we come back next week and say, no, we want 8%, we have the ability to do that upon notification.
Do they have to re-sign an
Except-
agreement?
Well, and all of these things are subject to Oregon State statute as well. Yeah.
But-
So,
And
actually,
FCC
7% is the maximum we can,
Well-
until they change that.
Well-
And that's just me splitting hairs,
Well,
perhaps,
let's
but-
use a different,
Yeah, yeah.
let's say
Example.
7% and a penny a foot of
Yeah.
conduit or something. I mean, then they would have to do that. Is that not correct?
Well,
Unless the FCC or the PUCs,
it would be more accurate if it were under 7%, because of that cap. But, I mean, basically, from my understanding of what you're trying to get at with the privilege tax, is that there are certain types of products and services in the telecommunications that by definition have kind of eluded this franchise. And we tried to address that with the Lightspeed one by saying any and all revenue at 7%, which was the maximum. Now, whether there's things being bundled in certain ways that are argued to fall under the Internet Freedom Act, and whether or not those things can be taxed is going to be something that we try to address. I understand now even more that I had never heard of a minimum in terms of, so I have to look and make sure that that's an okay thing too, in terms of the level playing field case law. So we can address things as long as they are legal, and
Right.
yes, they will be subject to
But-
them.
but the
I have to
gaming-
make sure they're legal.
the gaming of the process of bundling is because the franchise that those others have is technology-based franchise, not a revenue-based model. So once we get them on a revenue-based model, then they can't say, well, it's VoIP as opposed to TDM or whatever that stuff is. And it doesn't matter. It's revenue.
For the privilege of doing business in our town, yes.
That's right.
And using our right-of-ways. So, to answer, I'm just, maybe, and I'm throwing too many things out there, but yes, as long as we do it legally,
Yeah.
if we change it, they are subject to it under this contract.
Including changing the format as a minimum of X number of dollars, or 7%, whichever's
I'm going to do
greater.
some serious research on the minimum, though, just to make sure.
Well, sure.
Because of whether or not that falls within a level playing field idea. Because that's taken very seriously.
Oregon City, as I understand, Oregon City's agreement with the county
Footage.
is a flat fee. It's not a variable rate. This is a variable rate. Variable based on the revenues.
My understanding of the Oregon City one was, it was a contract that was made basically on its own, outside of normal franchise agreements.
Quite.
Yeah.
It's not a franchise agreement, really.
Because our franchise ordinance, or our telecommunications ordinance now, doesn't have the linear footage like the Oregon City folks do. They aren't going to have nearly as many feet in our town as Oregon City does, and so their type of fee that they're charging is well and above what would even be equitable in terms of, even if we had that same idea. But it certainly isn't equitable in the sense of, like, we just chose to charge them $12,000 a month for our city. That wouldn't be anywhere close to what everybody else is being treated like in our town, so it just depends on what that minimum is and whether or not that's, falls within the case law that says that that's equitably treating somebody who, because of the way they define their activity, can't be gotten out another way.
If I may. The Oregon City situation was very unique and not replicated anywhere else, nor will it be. By state law, Oregon City has to be the county seat, the county has to be there. We have a unique relationship with Oregon City that we don't have with any other city for that very reason. Our footprint in Oregon City is very large relative to what it would ever be and can be, partly, mostly for that reason, or for any other city in Clackamas County. There was a lot of misinformation. There were a lot of mistakes made, misunderstandings around. But I can tell you what it is. There's no linear foot fee that the county pays in the agreement in Oregon City.
So it's a flat rate contract.
Basically, it's for them, they wanted a minimum of 12,000 or 6% of revenue, whichever is greater. My understanding, the chair negotiated this with the city. My understanding was they thought that that would be about equitable or even. And it would never be, because we would need to have probably almost 70 public agency anchor sites to reach the amount of revenue where $12,000 is that 6%. We're going to have maybe 30 anchor sites at full build-out in Oregon City. So we would not be able to financially afford that. If everybody does the Me Too and jumps on the Oregon City, we'll need to kind of pack up, frankly. Because what happens with the franchise fee, if you look at your utility bills at home, the companies don't pay them.
Well,
We do.
I can tell you there's a 109-year-old company in this town that would like to see you back up.
Well, and probably LS and probably Time Warner too, but this is the 21st century and it's a little bit different than it was, like you said, 109 years ago.
Yeah, so on the record, John Nicholson, Vice President and General Manager, 2W Telecom. And, I understand your concerns about wanting everything to be equal and having an ordinance in place. However, what I don't understand is that currently with the franchise fee that you have in the agreements, it is 7% of total revenue. What you're looking for with the privilege tax is 7% of total revenue. It's a wash. It's basically language, what we're calling franchise fee or privilege tax. The one that will be hurt the most, quite frankly, when you move to a privilege tax, if you apply it completely across the board, would be Canby Telephone. Because they're only paying fees on their exchange revenues, which is far less than their total revenues. And so from our standpoint, we're more than willing to pay on the total revenues. We do that with all kinds of municipalities and cities around Oregon in the metro area. I will say that the 7% that we're facing here is the highest that we pay anywhere else, but we're willing to do that, regardless of whether it's a franchise fee or a privilege tax. And the other side of this too, I don't have any ties to Clackamas County and the project they're doing. We are looking possibly at picking up some dark fiber on some of the stuff that they built and paying for that. But most of what they're doing, and here's where I do agree with Keith, most of what they're doing is providing nearly free service to clients that I would normally sell service to. So they're actually taking revenue away from me. In that sense, I can look at it and go, federally funded, and it's taking revenue out of my pocket. But it is also offering a great benefit to your community by being able to provide high-speed connectivity to a healthcare clinic and to the school district. So it has benefits to the folks that are here within your community as well. So I can argue both sides of that one. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay,
Mike?
Please.
Thanks, John, and you are correct. If we have to go to 7% on all our revenues, what's going to happen is there's going to be cherry picking. Businesses are going to go after the well-to-do customers that can pay the businesses, and we'll be serving those that can barely pay, and the citizens of this community and the smaller businesses that don't have the demand for services will be paying significantly higher taxes. So if you go to a flat 7% of all our revenues, we will lose our good customers, and we'll keep those customers that can barely pay. So we would like to have a much more thorough discussion of this new structure than we've been able to have, quite frankly. Because, again, as David has said, he's got 2 sites at, say, $1,000 a site, 7%. He's going to pay 7% on $2,000. And John and TW has probably 4 or 5 customers they're going to go after, maybe a cell site or 2 or a good business or 2. 7% for them is nothing. 7% for us on all our revenues will probably drive us out of business. That's the flat-out truth. Today, we pay on certain services at 4, 5, or 6%, depending on whether it's cable or telephony, but not 7% across everything. And people today are complaining about their telephone bills and their cable bills. And they don't pay on broadband at all. So that $19.95 or that $49.95 or that $69.95 is going to go up another 7%. And those are not the customers they're going after. Those are the voters of this community that you may inadvertently, through this ordinance, without a healthy discussion, drive away from us or drive them to other services, or to wireless that don't pay you anything. Because that's our other option. I don't have to pay 7% on wireless, so I'll just go to wireless. So your quick solution is not a good solution across all services. I'd urge you to give it more serious consideration. Again, Clackamas County says they've got a dead end at the end of June. Well, they've had a year since they put that conduit in. And now they're telling you we've only got 6 weeks. They've created the emergency, they've created the urgency, and now they want you to respond to them when they didn't respond to you for months. So I ask this council to please take your time and think this through. Because what you're telling us today is that when we come up for renewal, you're going to charge all of our customers, because we have to pass it on or go out of business, 7% more. And I'd ask the citizens that are watching tonight, do you want to pay 7% more on every single one of your items you buy from us or from Wave Broadband? Because they're the other broadband provider that today doesn't pay 7% on that fee. So what you've done is you've created a unique situation for 2 or 3 carriers that could totally change the landscape for the major carriers that are providing all services to the citizens of this community. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.
So that brings back the question of the cart before the horse.
So, I'm looking to you guys in terms of where we're at with the dialogue this evening on these 2 ordinances. Is it still?
Well,
feeling it?
My concern with Mr. Gaylord's comment, and I understand where he's coming from, believe me, but we've complained that we didn't have a level playing field. Now we're putting a level playing field in, and now the level playing field isn't going to work for everything. So is there a solution? You know, we don't have it now. You know, the customers aren't paying a privilege fee or a franchise fee, however you call it. They aren't paying it on certain broadband things and voice over IP and cellular. I mean, so if we go to the revenue model, that levels that out, but it puts 2 carriers at a significant disadvantage in certain parts of the business. It also puts them at a further disadvantage for their broadband that they will start paying on when that day comes, that wireless providers, for example, can provide more and more often and don't pay that fee. It's just like the franchise fees that Wave and Camitel are paying, customers are paying today. If you have Dish or DirecTV, you don't pay it. You know, so there is a 7% disadvantage to our local carrier. I don't know what the answer is to it. I mean, I think if we try to solve it in a way that is different than where we've been heading, we're going to have the same thing of cherry-picking services or calling it what you will to avoid the privilege tax or the franchise fee. So I don't know what the answer is.
So are you for moving forward with these 2 ordinances as they are, or?
Waiting till after the workshop.
But
Mr. Mayor, is there any chance of having any type of workshop? Joe was real good with me the last 2 days. I mean, when I just made the call. Didn't know that this was really coming up, and this is an important thing. We will be glad to donate our time and expertise in trying to come up with workshops and work with.
well, let me propose this idea.
Okay.
I have no objection to the workshop and, taking a study on the thing and try and find an overall solution. I believe these agreements, the way Joe has crafted them, give us the flexibility that if we do that and we come up with a new scheme, a new model, that we have the ability to go back and change these to accommodate.
Well, and frankly, they're, by Oregon law, they're kind of maximized at 7%, so it's not going to get worse for the franchisees.
Well, it is for two carriers because of the way the ordinance is written today.
Yeah.
They're only paying the 7% on a piece of their services as opposed to everything. So what I'm proposing is that we approve these because we have the ability to change them, that we don't on the others until they come up for renewal. We don't have that luxury. And I don't know how long those franchises, you and Wave both expire at the same time.
Yeah, it's
We-
been about 7 or 8 years.
They were 6 years, and I think they were instituted about a year ago.
Two-
so I
yeah,
think
so
5 more years.
4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 more years.
I mean, if you change the 12.36, are you saying that we can stay by our own?
Well, I need to read your franchises closely to make sure that, what your current deal is.
See, my concerns are if you change 12.36, we're obligated.
Yeah, because, well, I believe your franchises, without having memorized them, incorporate 12.36 to the extent, and 12.36 does mention, from time to time, it can be amended, so.
So,
this
but
doesn't
with
amend
this, we're not
12.36.
amending 12.36 tonight.
No, we're using it.
We're simply citing that they have to build to or follow, but we aren't changing 12.36.
No,
We're implementing the fee structure on these particular two that matches LS's a few weeks ago, months ago.
what this does is it uses 12.36, establishes the 7% rate on all revenues, and the reason 12.36 is incorporated into it is because it has all of this other stuff about how you even apply, how you get permits, how you repair the streets to reasonable working
Right.
order, all of that stuff. So instead of having to repeat that, we use our ordinance, we have to follow ordinance anyway, and this just simply set the rate, which was the maximum by law, which is 7%.
So I guess my point is, I don't think we are risking anything by adopting these tonight for these particular two vendors, because we're not changing their franchise at this point until the renewal date, or if we did something in 12.36 that maybe impacted them, but we're not changing 12.36 tonight. So whatever is there is there.
Correct.
I guess that's my point. That
And if you, I guess there's other issues because we were planning on potentially trying to change 12.36.
And I think if we do
On
that,
June
then
5th.
we owe it to our customers to, the vendors to be at the table to have some input to what we change.
Okay, so just the workshop, but maybe not the ordinance for next.